About 5 years ago, I met a wise and wealthy man who had spent his entire life studying success, and he'd reached a clear conclusion concerning the reason for success in life and especially in business. He's dead now, but I'll never forget what he told me.
He said, Brian, he said, it's simple. He said, use proven success methods. He said, learn from the experts. He said, Brian, you'll never live long enough to learn it all for yourself. Well, if you go into the kitchen to cook a dish, and the very first thing you get is a recipe, and you follow the recipe, and you work with the recipe, eventually you'll master that dish. Once you've mastered it and made it a few times, you can make the dish over and over again, and you'll remember the recipe. You don't have to keep going back to the recipe book. Now, if somebody says, boy, that's really delicious, you don't say, well, it's a miracle, like something out of voodoo. No, you just followed a proven recipe that had been worked out by people before you. And that's basically the secret of success. If you want to be successful in starting a business, then you study what people have learned, and everything that people have learned they've written down or shared in seminars or put onto audio programs. So what I find is that successful people are those who learn from others who've gone before them. Unsuccessful people try to make it all up, like a cook going into the kitchen, taking ingredients out of the cupboards, throwing them all in a bowl, and wondering why it doesn't taste good. This is why 20% of businesses in any industry make all the profits, why 20% of the professionals in any service make 80% of the money, and so on, is because they follow proven success principles.
Now, what I discovered, which changed my life and which brought us here today, is I discovered the law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect, sowing and reaping, action and reaction, is the great universal or iron law of the universe. What it says is that everything happens for a reason, is that there are no causeless effects, is that even if we don't know what is causing the effect, we trace it back. It's the basis of the scientific process, of all medical research, of all marketing, of all business, is if you can define the effect that you want in your life, and then what you do is you trace it back to someone who at one time was earning less than you and who's now earning twice as much. And then you find out what they did. You come here and you ask Ed and his people and they'll tell you, and then you do the same thing. We say success leaves tracks. So you just do the same thing and you get to the same place. Which brings us to one of the great rules of success, is that if you do what other successful people do over and over again until it becomes a habit, nothing in the world can stop you from getting the same results that they do. And if you don't, nothing can help you. Well, over time, I learned this, and this is the great principle, is that thoughts are causes. Thoughts are causes. Your thoughts, however well put together, as we talked about earlier, determine what happens in your life. And conditions, the conditions of your life, are effects. So basically, you create your own life with your own thinking. Now, this is one of the hardest things for people to understand, is that their entire outer world is merely a mirror. It reflects back to them in absolute, complete accuracy what there is going on inside. Now, much of what is going on inside is conscious, some of it is unconscious, but basically it's the way we think and see ourselves and feel about ourselves on the inside that determines our external world. Once you understand that, by the way, you move into the top 10 or 20% of thinkers in the world. The most important quality for leadership is responsibility, is to accept responsibility and say, I am where I am and what I am because of myself. You cannot imagine a leader weeping, whining, crying, and making excuses. The reason that people don't succeed is because they have excuses. As Mark Twain said, there are 1,000 excuses for failure, but never a good reason. So one of the things we do is there's no more excuses. Either do it or don't do it. Get in or get out, but I don't make excuses. And acceptance of responsibility is not optional, it is mandatory. You cannot go any further. You are literally blocked in place, almost like there's a wall in front of you, until you accept responsibility and make the leap and never make another excuse. So we say that the word responsibility can be broken down into two words, response and ability. It is your ability to respond. Well, in our life, every time we respond effectively to a challenge, we grow and become stronger. And we become more tenacious, and we become more confident, and we become more powerful. So the only thing that we can be sure of is challenges. Your life will be one series of challenges after another. They will never stop. They will come like the waves from the ocean, problem after problem after problem. The only question is, can we respond effectively? And if you do, you continue to grow. Very, very important. This attitude is the attitude of the leader. Which brings us to the greatest discovery of all, which is that you become what you think about most of the time.
Now, how does it work? Why do we become what we think about? Well, I'll tell you how it works as far as we know. Suppose a farmer has some land, and it's good, fertile land. Now, the land gives the farmer a choice. He may plant in that land whatever he chooses. The land doesn't care. It's up to the farmer to make the decision. Now, remember, we're comparing the human mind with the land, because the mind, like the land, doesn't care what you plant in it. It will return what you plant, but it doesn't care what you plant. Now, let's say that the farmer has two seeds in his hand. One is a seed of corn, the other is nightshade, a deadly poison. He digs two little holes in the earth and he plants both seeds, one corn, the other nightshade. He covers up the holes, waters, and takes care of the land, and what will happen? Invariably, the land will return what is planted. As it's written in the Bible, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. Remember, the land doesn't care. It will return poison in just as wonderful abundance as it will corn. So up come the two plants, one corn, one poison. Now, the human mind is far more fertile, far more incredible and mysterious than the land, but it works the same way. It doesn't care what we plant. Success, failure. A concrete worthwhile goal, or confusion, misunderstanding, fear, anxiety, and so on. But what we plant, it will return to us. Decide now, what is it you want? Plant your goal in your mind. It's the most important decision you'll ever make in your entire life.
So what do you think about most of the time? I've worked with Tom Stanley and Bill Danko. And Tom Stanley and Bill Danko are the ones who wrote The Millionaire Next Door. And Bill Danko did most of the heavy lifting. He did 25 years of detailed research, surveys, analysis, attending meetings, and so on, to find out how self-made millionaires think most of the time with regard to money. And you know what they think about most of the time with regard to money? They think in terms of financial independence. And whenever they have to make an expenditure or a decision with regard to money, they say, does this help or hurt? Does this add up or take away? Because everything counts. Tom Stanley talks about going to a conference of entrepreneurs that had been addressed by an economist the year before. And it was at the reception. And he heard people saying, what's yours? And he said, 8 and 4. What's yours? 10 and 2. What's yours? 6 and 3. What's yours? 18 and 2. What's yours? Made it in April. And he was asking people, what is this? What's yours? What's yours? What's yours? He said, well, last year we were taught by the economist to think in terms of how long we could survive financially if our income was cut off based on months and years. And so first thing we have to do is calculate how much would it cost me to survive for 1 month if I had no income at all. And then you multiply that times 12, and that's how much you would require to take 1 year off. Now, one of your great goals in life is to work by choice if you work at all. You want to have enough money so that you never have to work again. You won't ever stop working, by the way, because knowledge workers never stop working. They just do different things. If you stop working with your brain, you start to deteriorate very rapidly. But if you keep working actively with your mind, you can live till your 90s. Anyway, so then you calculate, and this is what self-made millionaires do, is they calculate their monthly rate, all right, times 12 to get their annual rate. I'll just write annual. And then they multiply that times 20, the number of years that they are planning to live after they retire. And that gives them what is called the number. Now, every person here, is one of your responsibilities as an adult, has to know your number. What is my number? And the number is the amount with which you could retire and never work again. And the interesting thing is, knowing your number, calculating your number, will increase your likelihood of achieving it by about 10 times. Now, you guys are young, and you're in your 20s and 30s and 40s and so on. You don't think about this, but self-made millionaires start to think about it at a very early age. And they hit millionaire status by the time they're 45. So, do you want to be financially independent? Say yes. Then think about financial independence. So, the University of Pennsylvania was commissioned by several large companies to try to find out the profile of high-performing men and women. Over a period of 22 years, they interviewed 350,000 people. They gave them psychographic profiles to find out basically how they thought in a variety of different areas, qualities, characteristics, virtues, values, and so on. And then they followed them for as long as 2 years and asked them, what do you think about most of the time? What do you think about most of the time? And what they would do is they would say, sir, what is your name? Skip. They would say, Skip, we're doing this research at the university. Would you participate with us? And Skip would say, well, I'm pretty busy. What's involved? You say it's all we'll need is 10 seconds a week. And someone will call you randomly, you'll never know the time, and they just ask you, hello, Skip, what are you thinking about right now? What are you thinking about this very minute? And you can say, well, I'm thinking about this implant, I'm thinking about accounting, I'm thinking about playing golf on the weekend. It doesn't matter what the answer is, just tell them exactly your top of mind thought. And then they tracked these, and they found that they began to break down in different ways. And then they began to slice and dice them by deciles. The bottom 10%, next 10%, all the way up to the top 10%. And they found that people in the top 10% think very differently from people in the bottom 80 or 90%. Can you guess what top people think about most of the time? Well, the answer is they think about what they want and how to get it most of the time. They think about what they want and how to get it most of the time. So I'm going to teach you a go-forward word, and this is the word that you're going to use for the rest of your career. This is the word that will guarantee that you'll get onto the fast track in life, you'll increase your income at a more rapid rate than the average person, and you take complete control of your life. And the word is how. Now, when you ask the question how, it's like stepping on the accelerator of your own creative mind, and it throws off ideas. And the interesting thing is, they did a study at Harvard. They found that the greatest single predictor of success, especially financial success in life, is creativity. And creativity is designed by the number of ideas you come up with. And you'll find that the more ideas you come up with, because of the law of probabilities, the more likely it is you come up with a great idea. So it's really important. Every time you ask the question how, you get ideas for action. Wow. All right. Now, this brings me to what we call the X factor. Now, the X factor is one of the most important things I ever learned. The X factor is the key to your success. The X factor is what's going to make you rich. Now, the X factor, sometimes we call this the focal point, is to determine where you are going to write the X in each area of your life. What is your X factor? Where do you create what is called the point of intensity? And what we know is that an X factor can be one of three things. It can be a goal. You can have a clear goal. Let's say, call this the focal point. Or it can be a measure. It can be a number, or it can be an activity. When we look at successful people, we find that successful people have focal points in the four critical areas of life. And the first critical area of life that I need to talk about is what is called, it has to do with income. And this is really important to understand, is the average person who works for a living thinks about their income in terms of how much they earn in a year or a month. What top people think about is not annual, but hourly. They think, how much do I earn per hour? And how much do I want to earn per hour? And they focus on doing the things that pay them their highest hourly rate. Which brings us to a great breakthrough concept. It's called the law of three. And the law of three is the key to doubling your income. The law of three says that in your practice, in any field, there's only three things that account for 90% of your income. Three activities. You could make a list of everything you do in the course of your practice, but you'll find there's only three things that pay you 90% of your income. If you make a list of 10 or 20 or 30 things that you do in the course of a week or a month, then you ask this question. And this is the great question, because you must help every person who is responsible to you, who answers to you, answer this question as well. The question is, if I could only do one thing all day long, what one thing would contribute the most to my practice or to my income? If I could do one thing all day long, what one thing would it be? And in your case, it's probably actually working on patients. Second, if I could only do two things all day long, what would be number two? If I could only do three things all day long, what would be number three? And whenever we put people in from any profession through this exercise, they're astonished to find that there's three things go pop, pop, pop off the list. And everything else is a support task, an enjoyable task, a complementary task, a task that can be delegated, outsourced, downsized, or eliminated altogether. And it takes tremendous discipline to do this. Now, the second most important part of your life is your family, is your family life. Now, how is it that top people think? Top people think in terms of FaceTime most of the time. This becomes the X factor. Yes, the X factor is where you put the emphasis in your life, and the emphasis is on face-to-face, one-on-one. Because there's nothing that can replace this, and there's nothing that's more important. There's nothing that leads to greater happiness and self-esteem and value. I was reading a book yesterday about a woman who was very, very unhappy because her husband never gave her any indication that he loved her and supported her, because he was always watching television. And you ask the husband, he said, sure, I love her. I think she's the most important person in the world. Well, then why don't you spend time with her? Well, I do. I'm in the house all the time. I come home after work every night. Well, no, that's not how women measure love. So the most important thing in your relationships with your spouse and with your children is FaceTime. How does a child spell the word love? T-I-M-E. How do children grow up? With high self-esteem and self-confidence. Their parents give them lots of FaceTime during their formative years. And as a result, they don't understand. They're not working it out psychologically. They just know that if the most important person in my world, this giant, is paying me all this attention, I must be pretty important. I must be really valuable. I must be a good person. And they grow up with high self-esteem and self-confidence, and they like themselves, and they like other people, and they're popular with their friends and everything. There's a great book called His Needs, Her Needs, or Her Needs, His Needs, whatever. And they talk about the 10 major needs that men have and the 10 major needs that women have, alternating back and forth. And all women know what man's first need is, so let's talk about hers. And her first need is for attention, affection, and respect. Attention, affection, and respect. Face to face, eye to eye, heart to heart, knee to knee, attention, affection, and respect. Those are the biggest needs. And if she gets those needs fulfilled, then everything else will be fine. If she does not get those needs fulfilled, she's going to be unhappy. And men think, well, geez, I'm in the same house, I'm watching TV. No, the only time you are actually with the woman in your world is when you are face to face and giving them attention and listening to them when they talk and giving them affection and respect. So FaceTime, and there's a one-to-one relationship between how much FaceTime you spend and what quality of life you have. So it's really important that you don't have FaceTime accidentally. You plan it, you schedule it, you organize, and the busier you are, the more you have to make appointments. Now, I know you all have date night once a week. If you don't, from this day forward, always have one night a week that is as adamant and as untouchable, where you go out on a date exactly as if you were single, and you plan, you prepare, you get dressed, showered, you go to a lovely restaurant, and you spend the entire evening together. And you always sit face to each other, or next to each other, but never sideways, but always where you can look into the face of the other person. You do that once a week, and it's one of those wonderful things that a marriage can do. Here's the third one. The third key has to do with health and fitness. Health and fitness. Now, with regard to health and fitness, we find there are two focal points. Focal point number one is waist size. Now, it's a really interesting thing. Your waist size, the fitness trimness of your waist is really important. It signals that you are healthy. It signals that you are interested. It signals that you have energy. It signals fitness and a whole bunch of other things. And the second part is what is called is minutes of exercise per week. Now, you and I, because of our health system today, no matter what they say in the papers, we have the finest health system in the world. It's that because you're intelligent and knowledgeable about health, you can expect to break the average. The average is running about 80 years. Half of the population dies above, half dies below. You can expect to hit 90 or 95 years old. Your job should be to dance at your grandchildren's weddings and be killed by a jealous spouse diving out a window at the age of 93. You know. But these are the two focal points. Think about your waist size, and what you do every single time you look at putting something in your mouth, you say, will this help or hurt my waist size? And then combine that with exercise, and the required is going up each piece of research, but it's about 200 to 300 minutes per week. If you do 200 to 300 minutes per week, which works out to 30 to 45 minutes a day, and all you have to do for exercise is go for a walk. You don't have to work out for the Olympics. You just have to go for a walk. Get onto a treadmill, get onto a bike, go for a walk around the neighborhood. And if you combine that by going for a walk with your spouse or going for a walk with one of your children, then you get a twofer. And so on. So it's really important.